So I want to go ahead and introduce our conversation partners tonight. So I'm actually going to introduce Arin Yost first. Arin is our interviewer tonight and an Agnes Scott College student. Arin is originally from Houston, Texas, and is currently living and working in Northeast Georgia while finishing their senior year at Agnes Scott College. After graduating, Z plans to take a gap year before attending graduate school to research transcarceral geographies. A part-time co-parent, farmhand, and bog monster, Arin can usually be found making zines, foraging in the Appalachian Mountains, or basking in a spot of 10 a.m. sunshine. Z is perpetually in search of present and future spaces of trans flourishing and slowly building her own such spaces alongside innumerable co-conspirators. Arin uses Z here pronouns and they them pronouns, and you can find them on Instagram. I'll drop their Instagram in the chat. So I asked Arin to be here because Arin's a part of our Trans and Friends group and also just like a brilliant young trans scholar that I'm super excited is coming up in the field. And so when I thought about this book and who I really wanted to have in conversation with Amy, Arin was the first person I thought of. So welcome, Arin. I'm really glad you're here. And welcome, Amy. So Ami Polonsky is the author of the critically acclaimed Gracefully Grayson and Threads. She's a middle school English teacher and a parent of two kids, one of whom exists happily beneath the trans umbrella. And the book we're here tonight to celebrate is Spin With Me, which is hot off the presses. And we're just thrilled to have this. So Gracefully Grayson has been a book that's been really important to a lot of people, and really was a groundbreaking book for many people. So we're thrilled to hear more about this. So I'm going to get out of the way and let Arin lead us into this conversation.
Well, first of all, it's really great to finally meet you. I've been emailing back and forth with different folks, but I'm really excited to get to hear a little bit more about you and sort of your thought process when you were getting into writing Spin With Me. So let's start off with just kind of the basics for those of us who haven't gotten to read it yet. Could you just tell us a little bit about the book?
Sure. And thank you so much. It's fabulous to be here. I wish it was in real life, but this is awesome as well. So thank you. So Spin With Me is a middle grade love story, crush story, love story about Essie, who is a 7th grade girl, and Ollie, who is a non-binary 7th grader. So it's kind of about their mutual obsession for one another and all of the sort of confusing and ridiculous things that can get in the way as we all navigate relationships.
And for those of us who haven't read it yet, would you be able to read like a passage or two from the book that you feel like shows us some of the world from Ollie and Essie's perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read 2 short passages. The book is split into 2 halves. The first half is narrated by Essie and the second half is narrated by Ollie. And I'm going to actually start with Ollie's first time seeing Essie, which is on day 1 of Ollie's section. Everything changed when I saw her. I'd been walking to my locker, psyching myself up with a "you're gonna kill it with your mad combination lock opening skills" pep talk, when I'd glanced to my left and spotted her, the new girl. Whoever had been behind me bumped into my back, and my inner Ollie rolled their eyes at me, but I couldn't move. I was powerless in her presence. She was looking nervously from her schedule to the locker numbers, and it dawned on me, she's probably Esther Rosenberg, the girl Mom had told me to introduce myself to. But I didn't. I couldn't. All I could do was visualize this show Dad and I had watched on the Science Channel the night before. Lightning storms in space, storm chasers in the ionosphere. I felt the blood pumping in and out of my heart in electromagnetic pulses, exploding like space lightning in bursts of blue and red. I'll read 2 more, just 2 more days. They're really short chapters, especially in the book. Day 2. "Spill it," Lucy said, waving her hand in front of my face to get my attention. "What?" I asked, turning to her and Savannah. They both burst out laughing. Savannah packed her empty Tupperware into her lunch bag and turned around to see what I'd been staring at, who I'd been staring at throughout lunch. "The new girl?" she asked, smiling. Lucy looked over her shoulder. Wait, you let her eat all by herself? She asked. Esther was getting up from the back table to throw out her garbage. I couldn't. She's nice, Savannah interrupted, saving me from trying to explain this thing that I had no words for. I met her in class yesterday. I'll ask her to eat with us tomorrow, you wimp. Spatula in hand as I fed a handful of pellets to Froggy, who A, still elicited bad memories, and B, definitely wasn't a dog. Froggy's the pet rabbit, just FYI. She goes by Essie, Mom, I told her more emphatically than I'd meant to. I'll take that as a yes, she said, looking at me curiously before disappearing back into the kitchen to flip the fried tofu. Really, Mom? Tofu again? I thought back to science and art and to lunch. I'd watched from the doorway as Savannah had called Essie over and she and Lucy had proceeded to introduce her to the world. They'd told her the name of each person sitting at our lunch table as I'd stared, starstruck. And that's Ollie, Lucy had finally said, smiling at me once I'd built up the courage to join them. I'd felt a tightening pressure in my chest, like a hand clasping a doorknob.
Okay, great. Can you hear me? Okay,
I can hear you, yeah.
Thank you so much. So I guess we can kind of get into a little bit. Who do you hope gets to read your book, and who are you writing for?
So I think in the publishing world, one can forget sometimes that their audience is kids, because as writers, our first audience, like the first people that we have to actually woo, are adults, like agents, editors, book reviewers. And it can be easy to forget sometimes that the book is actually for the kids. So I try to remember that I'm writing for kids first and foremost. And I guess, I'd imagine you're also asking because you're curious about whether I feel like I'm writing this for trans kids or cis kids, all kids. Truly in this case, I think it's both trans kids and cis kids. I wanted to write a happy, joyful story about a trans child because trans kids need that. It's overdue. But I also wanted to show cis kids a loved and lovable trans character.
That's really important, and I really appreciate that answer. So while reading Spin With Me, I was struck by the accuracy of certain trans experiences, such as Ollie's unease with sharing a changing room with Essie. Trans people are often teaching cis people about our own identities, and not just identities, but also constructions of sex and gender as a whole. And I'd love to know who taught you and how you aim to alleviate that burden on trans youth.
So I love this question. It's very near and dear to my heart in a couple of ways. So my 7th grader, Ethan, is trans, and Ollie's character is loosely based off of him. I think like just as Ollie's mom does in Spin With Me. And, you know, Ollie's mom in the book is totally just, that's like the most autobiographical thing I've ever written. So basically, just as Ollie's mom does, I've spent many years attempting to essentially intercept the cis and heterodominant world before it can filter into my own child's mind. It's sort of like this very desperate attempt to teach him that he's perfect the way he is, and that it's the world that's misguided because it doesn't understand gender. And so I think in doing so, I ended up spending a lot of time in Ethan's shoes, just trying to experience their life in relation to gender. And that's what taught me what I know. It was kind of like a very genuine, all immersive, like years long course that I basically took in gender studies. So, and in response to your question about, you know, my purpose, like, I think as an ally, 100%, I wrote this book as Ethan's ally, as a way to try to alleviate some of the burden that trans kids experience. And so, you know, I think of Ethan, I think of his trans friends, my trans students. I wanted all of them to not have to explain their existence and just be able to be. So interestingly, now that when I started writing this book, it was several years ago. And now that Ethan is in 7th grade and officially a month away from being an official teenager, I think it sort of, as a parent, feels like maybe not my place so much to do this anymore. Like, it felt good and fine to write these stories about trans kids when he was younger, but now it's sort of like the parent in me feels like, okay, maybe it's now time to sort of step back from this a little bit. I don't know. We'll see whether moving forward it feels right to use his experiences as kind of like a springboard into books anymore. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah, and that tension, I think, is really present in the book. You talk a little bit about the relationship between him and his parents, or between Ollie and their parents, and the relationship that Ollie has with the tension of being an advocate and just kind of being, which is really familiar to me, and I'm way past middle school. So, yeah, I guess you kind of answered this, but if you'd like to go a little bit more in depth, why was it so important to you to explore that conflict within Ollie's character?
Yeah, I mean, as a parent, I want everyone to see Ethan as Ethan first, because that's, I think, how he wants to be seen, and I would imagine that's fairly universal. So, I want him to be seen as himself rather than as, oh, that's that happy trans kid named Ethan. So, it's like first Ethan and then the other things. So in the liberal bubble in which I live, I think that even though I live in this liberal bubble, it's only people that are really super close to us as a family, like our real inner circle, who really know and see just Ethan. And that's something that I refer to in the book as the characters, just Essie, just Ollie. The people who really, really know us see him as just Ethan, who is the happy trans kid and the dog lover and the, hyper spaz and the child who likes to make awesome ice cream concoctions, like all of those things. And I think even where we live and where we're raising our children, which is, super open, and, things at school are great and like really supportive and all that, it's really only what, it's like once you get one layer out of our inner circle, I think that even here, people still see one layer out, people are still seeing him as, oh, that's Ethan, the happy trans kid, rather than just Ethan. So that's not fair, unless someone wants to be seen like that, which I think in many cases is not the case. So I wanted to shine a light on that. I think that if cis kids get that privilege of being seen just as themselves first, trans kids should have that privilege too.
Absolutely. I agree. Besides Ollie and Essie, I really enjoyed Savannah and Luciana's characters. Mm-hmm. I actually really kind of wanted more from them. And I was wondering what you had in mind when kind of building their characters and the dynamic of their friend group altogether.
Yeah, so I wanted Ollie and Essie to have all the support in the world. And as the author, I was just like, I'm just giving it to them. I'm giving them everything. So that included wanting them to have like super solid, super amazing, no drama friends. And I love the idea of dual perspective novels in general. A part of me feels like that's the only way to tell a story in life in general, is to have like the two perspectives or more. And I would love, one in Spin With Me, you've got Ollie's point of view and then Essie's point of view, and they sort of overlap like a Venn diagram. And then, it's like I could take all the other characters, like if this is Ollie, I could take Luciana and, put her here and show the overlap. And then I could have her brother here and show the overlap. And you could just like keep building this kind of circle-y, sculpture-y thing. And I think that would sort of, I think that if you wrote something like that, then you would really get to the whole point of like everything in the world, all of humanity, like all the different perspectives together in one cool bubble looking thing. So yeah, I love that idea too, of showing kind of like everybody else who's connected to Ollie and Essie.
Yeah. And I kind of, you talking about different perspectives and sort of the subjectivity of everything kind of brings me to my next question. As I was reading, I noticed that the way that you write is very queer. there's a focus throughout on like feelings and experiences that defy labels and objective understanding and even language. And this reflects both queer experiences and also like queer academic theory, which as a gender studies major, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. And I wanted to know, like, was this intentional? And how did you go about sort of building that theme?
So thank you, first of all. That's like a huge compliment to me. I really appreciate that. It wasn't, I think it wasn't intentional, but it was kind of inevitable. Like I'm very drawn to queer theory. I've tried to make it such that every decision that I make about parenting my child is informed by like a prideful, celebratory queer perspective, which has been an amazing and interesting challenge as a cisgender person. So, I mean, yeah, like labels, for example, they're everywhere. They're so useful. They're so important. And at the same time, they're so stifling and they're so suffocating. I think like one of the biggest takeaways that I've really, really internalized from writing this book is that everything contains multitudes and everything can be both itself and its polar opposite at the exact same time. And it kind of reminds me of what I always say, that like that a trans child, like their transness should be both no big deal and the world's greatest, most awesome deal, both at the exact same time, which is, I think, part of like that sort of, I don't know. I mean, it's the duck and the rabbit in the book. It's the optical illusions. You know, you can look at something from one perspective and see one thing and another perspective and see something else. And the truth is that it's both of those things at the same time.
Yeah. And none of those things all at once.
Exactly. Everything all at
once. Yeah, it's really fantastic to have such sort of masterful, very queer, non-binary representation, especially in media for children. This is something that I would have loved to have seen had I been in middle school and had access to books like that. With that being said, Ollie is, thin, white, androgynous, assigned female at birth, experiences physical dysphoria, comes from a relatively wealthy background, and these sort of reflect a lot of ideas about who can be trans and what transness looks like. And these ideas have been, rightfully so, critiqued for their sort of universality by a lot of folks within the trans community. Mm-hmm. What role does Ollie play in narratives of transness? And how do you hope to write more diverse trans and non-binary characters in the future?
So I think it's a really fair point, and I'm glad that you raised it. I actually, it was actually I think sometimes when authors write within stereotypes, we do it accidentally. And this time I did it very consciously. I knew that I was feeding into that stereotype as I wrote. And I was trying to balance, I know that that cis-centric culture sort of sees a character like Ollie as the most quote unquote acceptable or most comprehensible non-binary character. And I was trying to balance my role as someone who's writing outside of their own identity and the fact that I'm creating, or I don't know, like feeding into that stereotype. So in short, basically, it just so happens that each of these labels, like the thinness, the whiteness being AFAB, they also fit my own child. And I felt like as I'm writing trans characters, like 100% of the time I'm doing it, I'm wondering if I should really be doing it, like if it's my place to do it. And, as evidenced by the fact that I've done it, I've come to the conclusion that I think it's okay for me to do it. And at the same time, I 100% understand why people think that I shouldn't do it. So basically, I felt like the closer I stayed to my own child's experience, the more confident I was as a cis writer taking on a trans voice, which is why in the end, Ollie is all of those things that you listed. So I don't know, I don't know that I personally plan to write more diverse trans characters moving forward, because I don't know if I'm going to write trans characters anymore moving forward. I mean, my kid's getting older, as I said. I don't know. I don't know if it feels right anymore, but I certainly agree with you. And I think that for sure we need a lot of trans and non-binary trans characters in middle grade literature, YA literature, like in all kinds of media that represents a lot more than, just sort of this, what's seen, I think, as of now is like the most digestible version of a trans character.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate kind of your honesty in answering that, because it's definitely, whenever you're doing anything that has something to do with other folks who hold different identities than you, there's always sort of that tension there. But yeah, this is kind of an easier, a fun question. I know a lot of authors identify as avid readers. If that's the case for you, which it may not be, but if that's the case for you, I'd love to know who some of your favorite trans authors are who are writing that work.
Yeah. So I do read a lot because I teach 7th grade English and I write for middle schoolers. I do tend to read a lot of middle grade and YA literature, but amazingly enough, I did somewhat recently read an adult book, and I'll also admit that it was one of the first adult books that I had read in quite some time. So I read The 30 Names of Night by Zane Jukadar. I don't know if you've read that yet. It's like absolutely beautiful. It took me only reading the dedication to be 100% in. It's dedicated. It's for those who name themselves, which like really struck me. So that was amazing. I recently read Pet by Awake Amizi, which is really creepy, and it's about like a monster that comes to life from a painting, and it's not the type. I usually am like more of a realistic fiction type of person. I don't really gravitate to like fantasy monstery type things, but this was really, really, really amazing. The other book that I tried to read, but I was not able to finish because one of my students stole it from me, is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas, which was like the first couple chapters were so good that I book talked it to one of my 7th grade classes, and one of my students stole it, and that was that. I have not seen it since. So I do hope to finish that sometime soon.
That's funny. That's awesome. So you've talked a little bit about authors that you've read, and a little bit obviously about your children, your experience with your trans child. Do you have any other influences that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, well, so I teach 7th grade English. I'm pretty much surrounded by 12 and 13-year-olds all the time, all day, every day. They're at this like most wonderfully in between, awkward, weird stage of existence, and I find them hilarious. We laugh all day long. Sometimes we learn some English too. So for sure, like little, elements of all these preteen and teen personalities that surround me all the time, like definitely seep into my subconscious mind, and I'm sure influence characters in ways that I'm not even aware. Both of my kids influence me. Ben, who's my 9th grader, is a cis kid. He doesn't get mentioned as much in these conversations, but he's this, amazingly empathic, kind-hearted, funny, D&D loving, Star Wars loving, proud nerd. So he for sure influences me. TV, we recently watched Stranger Things, and we're almost done with season 2 of The Umbrella Academy right now, which I'm like totally obsessed with. I mean, all these, it's like you think that things that you're watching and reading and people you're around are like, separate from you, but I'm sure all these things seep into my brain and influence what I'm working on and writing, and so yeah.
That's funny that you mentioned being influenced by being around middle schoolers all day, because when I was reading the book, I actually at points I would turn to my partner and I'd be like, oh, like look at this, or I'd read a passage out loud or whatever, and we both remarked on how accurate the texting is compared to books that we grew up with as younger people. The way that adults were writing about texting was like wildly out of touch with the way that we actually spoke, and remarked that like your transcriptions of texting conversations seemed like relatively on the nose for what 7th graders are talking about.
Good. That means a lot to me. Thank you. Yeah, I'm basically just a 7th grader in a 45-year-old's body. So yeah.
Some would say that's probably the worst place to be, but I think it served you well in this.
Oh God. Yeah, I know. It's an awkward time for sure.
So I had just one more question planned. We've had a couple of questions pop up as well. Mm-hmm. So others, feel free to put in the Q&A. It'll pop up, ask a question. Feel free to ask a question. We'll get to those in just a minute. But the last one of my questions I had planned was, did you have any advice for other writers who might be looking to write about gender and sexuality?
Yeah, I mean, I would say do it, like definitely do it. My kid needs more. All the kids out there need more. I would say, you know, if you're writing outside of your identity in this regard, as I do, like just do it really, really, really carefully and for the right reasons. Get input on it, get feedback from people who are, you know, members of the group that you're writing about. You know, I think you know, if you're doing it to lift some of the burden as an ally and to showcase sort of like the amazingness of trans characters that exists both because of their transness and because of everything else about them, you know, like just there is such a need. There's so many kids who need to be reflected in books that aren't reflected yet in books. So I would say do it and do it carefully.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We've got a couple of questions from some folks who are listening. First question is, have your kids read the book yet? And if so, what did they think of it?
So yes, they both have. Well, okay. So Ben, who's 14, read an earlier draft, like a long time ago when it was still, you know, like printed out on computer paper, and he liked it. That he was like, okay, he was like, it's not really my type of book because, you know, it's not sort of. He really likes like fantasy, sci-fi stuff, and it's very far from that. But I think he liked it, unless he was just being polite, which is also possible. Ethan read it more recently, and his conclusion is that it's good. You know, I prefer Alan Gratz's books to this because they're a little more actiony, but you know, it's not my kind of book, but I liked it. So, so hey, you can't please everyone.
I love that.
Honesty is hard, right?
Yeah, right. Going back to sort of your influences or books that you've read recently, we have a question. Is there a book that you have read as an adult that you wish you had had as a teen or as a child, or that would have helped you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, the answer is yes. And like, there's so many books that would have helped me so much that basically when I was, you know, in middle school, this whole genre of middle grade and young adult fiction was just very much in its infancy. I mean, there were definitely middle grade books that I read. I read a lot of Lois Lowry books, like the Anastasia books. I don't know if people read those anymore, but like that was great. And it was literature that was written for people my age, but there was nowhere near as much as there is now. And I feel like the books that are out there now for middle schoolers are, I don't know, they're so much more diverse in the types of things that they talk about. So I'm trying to think like what, you know, interestingly, I wasn't like a huge reader in middle school, or in middle school I read and I felt sort of like a competent reader, but I didn't read a ton. I think any middle grade coming of age story would have been hugely helpful for me as just like someone. I don't think I really reflected on life very much at that age. And looking back, I wish that I did. And I feel like any good middle grade coming of age story could have helped me do that. So, you know, I mean, is that like, I don't want to feel like I'm evading the question here, but like everything, I mean, I think I could have, everything that's out there now would have been so helpful to me. And I'm just really grateful that things have changed so much and that there's so much more excellent literature out there now that before there just wasn't, there's hardly anything. I mean, kids read adult books more, you know, it was the olden days.
Yeah, I think even as you're saying that, I'm thinking about the library, the public library closest to my house growing up, and there was like the children's section, and then on the adult floor there was like a little room, and that was where you could get like the teenage, like the YA and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it was like 2 shelves, and that was it.
Hardly anything. So, it's so different now. It's so great.
Wow. Yeah. We have Another question, do you have anything that you're working on next? You mentioned maybe being hesitant or still kind of being undecided about writing more trans kids, but are we taking a break, or are you working on anything else?
So since I teach during the school year, obviously, for me, summers are big writing times. Like what I try to do is write a first draft of something over the summer. And I have an idea. It's like very, very much just like a little embryo of an idea. So it's something that it's not even formulated enough in my mind to really share it, but it's something that I am going to try to work on this summer. Coming up with ideas is hard. Writing is really hard. Finding time to write is really, like, everything is really challenging, especially now since, COVID and the whole world is just super weird. For me, if an idea comes to me, I have to make sure that it has a plot along with it rather than just characters. I know by this point in my writing career that if an idea comes to me, but it's only in the form of characters, that it's probably not going to work. I've tried to start many books that are just, they just don't have, things don't happen in the idea as it comes to me. So I have a whole file on my computer actually called Books I Tried to Write. And there's a lot in there. So basically, if an idea comes to me and it has characters and a plot along with it, then I know it'll hopefully work. So the idea that I have, the one that's a little bit, too undercooked to really share, does have a plot with it, which is a good sign. So this summer, hopefully I'll get a draft of that out. We'll see though, because once the school year starts, I can revise over the school year, but it's hard for me to have like to be creative. Revising, you can be a little bit less creative. It's that first draft for me that requires all the creative juices to be flowing. So hopefully, keep your fingers crossed. Hopefully this summer I'll be able to get that on paper.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially I have a folder in my Google Drive that's called Papers I Tried to Write. And it's half submitted conference submissions and like messy abstracts. So awesome. That's relatable. I definitely understand.
Glad it's not just me.
No, definitely not. Somebody else asked, how do you find a publisher?
So there are different ways to publish something. So if you've published or if you've written something, one route that you can always take is self-publishing, which is a really good option for a lot of people. If you want to try and find a traditional publisher, your best bet is to have a literary agent first. You in order to submit your manuscripts to like the big publishers, they need to go through a literary agent. So that is the first step in finding a publisher, is finding an agent. And once you find an agent who you get along with well and who really gets you and understands your work, et cetera, then they are the ones who take that manuscript and submit it to editors at publishing houses who, they have relationships with, they've worked with over the years, that type of thing. So basically, step one, find an agent. Well, step one, write something that's as good as humanly possible, and probably like join a writing group to make it, make it as good as you possibly can, and then join a writing group and then make it even better. And once you've gone through all those stages, then try to find an agent who will really, really get you and get your work. And then they'll take it to publishers for you.
And then there you go. You have a book.
Then you have a book. That's it. That's all there is.
All there is. Somebody else asked, what was the most challenging thing for you when you were writing Spend With Me?
When writing this particular story, that's an interesting question. What was the most challenging part? Well, I'll tell you something that's kind of interesting that was really challenging at the beginning and then actually ended up totally ditching it in my book, but I think it's an interesting thing to share. So in my first version of this book, it took place over the course of 180 school days, because most school year, is this accurate? I think most school years, kids are in school for like 180 days ish. So my first draft this current draft ends at winter break. and it's a little bit more condensed. But my first draft spanned the entire school year, like from the end, early September through June. And I tried to do something that was really fun, but I ended up ditching it. And it was super challenging. What I tried to do was have the, as the days passed, so when it was and I think I showed you guys before that there are, each chapter has I don't know if you guys can see this. It says like how many days left until, this is Essie, how many days left until she gets to go home. And then in Ollie's section, we have like which day it is. So in my initial draft, it went 1 through 100, 1 up to 180. And for Ollie's section, and it went 180 down to 1 for the first section. And I tried to do this experiment where I matched the word count in the chapter title to the number of words in that chapter. So Essie's first chapter was 180 days left, and I made it exactly 180 words. And then the next one was 179 days left, and I made it exactly 179 words. And it was really challenging to try to write with those within those parameters. And I loved doing it. It was like the most geeky, fun challenge I have ever given myself. I loved it so much that I started having my students, like when we would be writing something in school, I would make them pick a number like out of an empty Kleenex box. And if they got like the number 42, like whatever they were writing, they would have to do it in exactly 42 words. It was very nerdy and very fun. I loved it. So that was really challenging. And I also ditched the idea after the first draft because it was like it constricted the book too much. But I don't know if you noticed, Arin, but the chapters still do go, Essie starts with longer chapters and then they get shorter. And then Ollie start with really short chapters and they get longer. It's just not as prescribed as the like specific word count.
Oh. No, I did notice that. And that's really cool to hear what went into sort of making that happen. I wonder, it would have had to have been, I think, like a super fan to sit down and count to discover that if you had not just dropped that on us. So thank you for letting us know.
You're welcome.
Someone else has asked, how did you decide when you were finished?
When I was finished. God, I feel like this is the English teacher in me talking now, but it's like, you're never finished. I mean, even when I finished my last revision on this, which was, say in like November, I would have absolutely continued revising if my editor would have sent it back to me again. I think she just cut me off because it was just time to be done. But you're never done. I mean, you could keep going and keep revising. And even now, I hate reading books that are published. I actually reread Gracefully Grayson about a year ago. And I was just so nervous the whole time I was reading it. Like, what if I think it's terrible? Like, what if I see all these things that I wish I had done differently? So you're kind of never finished, but you just have to cut yourself off at some point. So like with the first draft, I knew that I could sense when it was time for that draft to be done and my agent to read it and that type of thing. And it's nice to have, if you have an agent who you love, like I'm lucky enough to have, you can trust the person to say, okay, this is like, it's finished and can go to editors, as opposed to like, I think you should revise certain things. So it's a very hard question. You would think there would be a straightforward answer to that question, but there's really not. Like, I really wish I could still be revising Spin with me. I wouldn't make big changes, just little wording things here and there.
Yeah, just line up the word count for every chapter.
Exactly, right? Count the number of words on each page.
Yeah, no big deal. Oh, okay. So someone else has asked, after you reread Gracefully Grayson, were you pleased with it or did you just hate it?
Somewhere in between. I just couldn't, I'm such a terrible critic of myself. Like I couldn't stop thinking about like, oh, I wish that in this place I had done, I don't even know if I can think of a specific example, but I definitely, this is just me being hard on myself. I was more focused on what I thought I should have done differently than on the parts that were good. Like I was really like, back to your question about diversity, Gracefully Grayson has like, it's like a very white story. Like there are no characters of color. And I was really cringing about that when I read through it. So, and then I just kind of like fixate on that and don't think about the other stuff that like worked out pretty well. So yeah, somewhere in between. Sort of pleased. Give it a 5 out of 10.
Not 5 out of 10.
Well, you know, in terms of like how pleased I was. With what I read.
That looks like that's it for questions. If anybody else has anything they want to get in real quick, we don't have to cut off, but looks like that's it for what we have unanswered for now. We can give folks a little bit of time to get their question if they have anything else. But this was really great. I really enjoyed getting to chat with you a little bit.
Me too. So nice to talk to you.
Yeah, I think this is a wonderful place to wrap it up. So thank you both. This was really great. I love a robust conversation about books for young people, because I feel like sometimes they're not given the full literary treatment that they deserve. And I think, especially you being an English teacher, like one of the things that I miss about high school and even middle school was getting to really dig into those books and talk about them and talk about the themes and all of that. So I want to thank everybody who asked great questions. Thank you, Arin, for leading this wonderful discussion. And Amy, thank you so much for this book and for your candid and generous answers.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so I want to let folks know, please buy Spend With Me via this teal link. You also, we are a nonprofit, so you can donate to our nonprofit via that link that's going to pop up. I'm going to be adding captions to this video and putting it up on our YouTube channel. So if there are folks who would prefer to watch this with captions for any reason, it should be up in like a day or two. And our YouTube is just /Charis Circle. And we would love for you to check out all of our videos there. We've got a ton of great stuff. A lot of really good YA events are up there, a couple middle grade events, and many, many trans events. So depending on the reason you're here, there's something for everyone. Yeah, so I think that's it. I hope everybody stays safe and well. And Amy, I hope that we'll get to host you in real space in the future at some point.
Sounds great. Thank you guys so much for having me. Thank you for those fabulous questions, Arin.
Yeah, really thank you for answering.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.